What's up, everybody? I'm going to do a quick video about the visa applications afforded to the uh, majority of the muscle hijackers that participated in the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and how their applications were able to be processed successfully, even though that they shouldn't, and who was behind the approval of these applications. And a little bit of history. J. Michael Springmann was the head of the Visa Bureau in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia during the Reagan and Bush administrations from September 1987 to March of 1989. While he was in Saudi Arabia, Springmann was ordered by a number of high-level State Department officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants, people who couldn't, people who left out answers to certain questions. Springmann later stated that these applicants were terrorist recruits of people like Osama bin Laden, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Jalaluddin Haqqani, Afghan warlords in Afghanistan, and that they were being sent to the United States in order to obtain training from the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, Springmann later went to and complained about these applications being approved when they shouldn't be, and he was ordered to be silenced on the matter. The State Department later stated that the consular officer had the final authority in issuing visas and not J. Michael Springmann. So what happened was, during the summer of 2001, a number of these muscle hijackers were coming to the United States through two U.S. consular offices, one in Riyadh and one in Jeddah. Each of the 19 of the hijackers entered the United States all on valid visas, and 15 of them were from Saudi Arabia. Now, according to J. Michael Springmann, he went on to say that on a visa application, you got to establish some kind of connection to a place of application of your own country. In other words, you have to have a job. You're going to school. You're running a business. You have an investment, whatever that shows financial stability. That's going to be strong enough to bring you back from the United States for whatever reason you're going there. For example, people go for tourism or to visit friends and relatives or to sign a business deal with the United States, but that they can't stay there. They have to go back to managing their own business, their own lives in their host country. The hijackers that were involved with the September 11th attacks, the muscle ones, the muscle hijackers, none of those people had any ties whatsoever. On a lot of these applications, they couldn't even name the city they were going to. They couldn't tell the consular officer why they were going there, and that they had no available information as to what they were doing or where they were going. Most of them couldn't even speak proper English. Now, this was a big problem because Springmann basically complained to his superiors. Now, one of those superiors was a consular officer in Jeddah by the name of Shanya Stienger, who was in charge of approving these applications that Springmann had suspended, in which 11 of these applications were approved for U.S. visas. And all 11 of these people participated in the September 11th attacks. And she gave closed-door testimony to the 9/11 Commission, and she still has a job, and she had gotten promotions. Stienger herself basically is somebody who has an interesting background. And what I want to what I want to talk about here is I want to talk about her interview with the Inspector General at the Jeddah U.S. Consul Office, which I'm going to show you when I share the screen. And we'll go over what I think is the problem here and what happened. Now, look, J. Michael Springmann was actually forced out of his job. He's done a number of interviews, and he's actually talked about this issue regarding what is happening and who he complained to and why it was a failure, because he actually went and complained to people like Justice Stevens. Justice is the given name, and he was the head of the consular section. He complained to people like Stephanie Smith of the Foreign Affairs Office in Jeddah, and he found out that she was a CIA official when she was a consular officer in Riyadh. And she actually told J. Michael Springmann that this is a very bad thing. And when you go back to Washington, tell the Bureau of Consular Affairs about this. And when he did, they had no interest. And he thinks that Stephanie Smith and Shanya Stienger basically told them that there was nothing wrong with the applications of these people, even though there was glaring red warning signs. And the United States was in very high alert in 2001. There was a number of different foreign and domestic intelligence agencies that were basically warning the United States that bin Laden wanted to attack the United States inside the country. And this is coming from the CIA, the FBI, even though those warnings were vague, when they had detailed information and they didn't share it. Spain, Germany, Russia, Iran, all gave intelligence warnings about Al-Qaeda wanting to conduct terrorist attacks inside the United States. So these applications should have went through great scrutiny, and they didn't. And I think what I would like to share with you now is the interview conducted by the Inspector General, Office of Inspector General, memorandum of conversation dated January 20th, 2003. As you can see, the U.S. Consulate General Dubai of United Arab Emirates and Shanya Stienger, whose name is redacted here, okay? So, issuance of NIVs to 9/11 hijackers is the subject. So we're going to read this together. Okay, let me blow this up a little bit and shorten the screen. Okay, you can read it. So blank traveled from blank to Dubai to meet the inspectors there. That's Shanya Stienger. She was interviewed on Monday morning in the conference room of the Consulate General. She related that she testified on August 6, 2002 in Washington, D.C. before staff members of the Burton Committee. She has not been party to any other interviews. However, not the Bureau of Consular Affairs, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, or the FBI have interviewed her about her issuance of non-immigrant visas to 10 of the hijackers. It was later 11. Asked about the February 2002 visit to affected posts by CA delegate Gretchen Welch, she responded that Welch had conducted informal discussions about her new clearance procedures and did not question Steiger about what had happened. Shanya Stienger arrived in Jeddah on July 1st, 2000 to begin her first Foreign Service assignment. She had a one-day overlap with her predecessor, blank. At Post, she learned that Jeddah had a policy of interview by exemption for Saudi nationals. She was told that the only reason Saudi Arabia did not qualify for the visa waiver pilot program was because of its strict treatment of American visa applicants. Were the kingdom to be more forthcoming with visa reciprocity for American visitors, it would have qualified the visa waiver program by virtue of the tiny percentage of Saudi visa holders who overstayed or were turned back home by Immigration and National Services, the INS. There was blank said a virtual visa waiver program for Saudi citizens. On those rare occasions that a Saudi application raised specific concerns and was not clearly approvable, would the applicant be asked to appear for an interview? And that's the proper procedure, is that if a consular officer who is viewing the initial application and sees that there's maybe an unanswered question, or maybe an answer that doesn't fit right with the question, that application is put on hold, and then an additional interview, is a face-to-face interview, is conducted, and which the officer asks additional questions about why they didn't answer the question properly, and then they could gauge maybe an answer and maybe ask additional questions relating to those questions that he didn't answer, and then he makes a decision based on that interview. But it goes through a review and a process. So there's a process involved with this. This often resulted in the foreign ministry phoning the consular general or the consular section chief to ask why a personal appearance was necessary. She showed us a copy of 2000 Riyadh 02002, which made mention of the general inapplicability of Section 214B to Saudi nationals. Her biggest visa challenge, she said, was non-Saudi applicants, third country nationals, or TCNs. Under the Visa Express program, third country national applicants were also interviewed by exception, but they were required to submit supporting documents with their applications that Saudis were not. And TCNs were interviewed much more often. Saudis were asked to submit only their passports and applications. No evidence was required to support claimed socioeconomic ties, since all Saudis were presumed to have such self-evidently strong ties as to need no proof. Do you see the problem here? So most of these muscle hijackers were actually giving an allowance by the consular officers in Jeddah and Riyadh to not provide additional documentation, because they were assumed that they had socioeconomic ties, that all these Saudis are rich, and that they have business deals inside the United States. Most of these muscle hijackers involved with the September 11th attacks came from the poorest regions in Saudi Arabia and were basically illiterate. And that's why they're duped by these imams, these ghoulish Salafist imams, to conduct these terrible attacks. Now, Jeddah Consular staff believed that they were a little tougher on adjudicating NIVs than Embassy Riyadh. During the summer of 2001, the section chief, Art Mills, was on home leave. So blank, the NIV officer, was working alone. All told, she had issued about 20,000 visas during her tenure at Jeddah. Shanya Stienger. She routinely worked until 10 p.m. to catch up on the large number of visa applications. Nevertheless, she wanted to continue Jeddah's practice of interviewing first-time Saudi applicants for student visas. During that busy summer, Shanya Stienger worked very hard, doing 400 to 500 cases every day. She said that she had no time to look beyond the name and the date of birth on the visa application forms. She knew that some of them were incomplete, but believed that this did not matter because the Saudi applicants were eligible for visas in any case. That is the Visa Express program authorized by the United States to Saudi Arabia because of their long-standing relationship, and didn't want to offend the Saudis by denying applications. Furthermore, the INS didn't have access to those applications anyway. It did not matter exactly which hotel they would use in the United States. For example, Shanya Stienger said that Consul General Baltimore was a good boss and supportive, but knew little about consular work. He did not interfere in consular section policies. So in other words, nobody was overseeing Shanya Stieger's work. And basically, this is like plausible deniability. So even though she's overworked, even though she had an enormous amount of work regarding Saudi applicants, they're wanting either student visas or work visas, which are temporary, and she's overloaded. She could have used some help. She worked alone without any pressure from a superior over her shoulder. There were no travel agency programs in Jeddah before Visa Express. Only Saudis, the national airline headquartered in Jeddah, and the Saudi government used a drop-off system for submitting applications. There was no face-to-face interviews done with these applicants either, just to remind you. There were no personal appearance waiver programs. In other words, the muscle hijackers didn't even bother to be reviewed additionally when it comes to face-to-face, right? They just dropped off their applications, and they didn't, some of them probably filled out the applications. Maybe somebody else did them, but they were dropped off, but there was no face-to-face. That's another problem. So Shanya Stieger, right there, probably should have suspended these applications because a lot of them were incomplete. However, let's go back. Most individuals walked into the consulate and dropped off their applications. Saudis were dismissed and TCNs were interviewed. So in other words, if a third country person comes in, say Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and they dropped out the application, there was a face-to-face meeting. But if they were Saudis, they did not. So in other words, how convenient was this? So the muscle hijackers, all from Saudi Arabia, didn't have to come in a face-to-face. So in other words, Shanya Stieger read these incomplete applications and didn't require a face-to-face meeting, which is exactly what should have been the protocol following these applications. But because she wasn't getting supervised correctly, in which J. Michael Springmann back in the early 90s, late 80s, complained about this procedure, in which is still continued under his tenure. He basically complained and he was let go. Now, Shanya Stieger was opposed to some of the details of the Visa Express program, which was initiated on June 1st, 2001, but not for reasons related to terrorism. She felt that Riyadh imposed the Visa Express program on them. She believed that Riyadh made the program mandatory because the Consulate General in Riyadh, Tom Furry, had excellent experience with a similar program in Mexico. The program also eliminated the need for interviews for first-time student visa applicants. Every single one of the muscle hijackers were first-time student visa applicants. And as I read to you previously, first-time visa applicants in other consular agencies required an interview, face-to-face meeting. She also felt that it was a bone tossed to Riyadh RSO, who was becoming concerned about the security threat posed to the post by a large crowd of visa applicants, because a lot of people that were coming from Afghanistan traveling to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, or Pakistan to Saudi Arabia, known terrorist hotspots, were given their visas, their applications were approved without a face-to-face interview. So in other words, even if the muscle hijackers fill out these forms, Shanya Stieger wouldn't even know them by face because there was no face-to-face meeting. It's huge, by the way. Because who knows who could have filled out these applications? Was it them? Was it somebody else? Most likely it was them, because most of these people were illiterate and they couldn't even speak English, didn't even know where they were going. But she can't identify them because there was no face-to-face interview. Now, before Visa Express was instituted, most TCN applicants in Jeddah applied in person at the consulate. Visa Express mandated that all applications be submitted through travel agencies, which therefore made it necessary for all TCNs to make 2 trips, one to travel agency and the second to the consulate. So this is the correct procedure for first-time applicants and for applicants who are labeled TCNs, third country nationals. Why isn't it for Saudis? Later on, by the way, after 9/11, the Saudis had to go through scrutiny. Of course, it's too late by then, right? It was therefore inefficient, she thought, and it obliged her to review some 300 applications daily. Shanya Stienger had no objection to Visa Express for Saudis, since it kept those people who would not be interviewed in any event away from the consulate. She repeated that her objections to Visa Express had nothing to do with Saudi applicants, their eligibility, or security concerns. Only the program's effort on the handling of TCN applicants. Shanya Stienger drafted a cable to convey her reservations about Visa Express and did not send it once. A kudos cable came back from CA praising the new program, right? Let's continue. Referring to the hijackers to whom she issued visas without an interview, Shanya Stienger said that upon reflection, she had decided that even if she had interviewed them, she would more than likely have issued the visas. So in other words, even though every single one of these applications were incomplete or the answers were vague, for example, they couldn't tell you where they were going. They couldn't tell you how much money they had, what business they had in Saudi Arabia, why they were going there. Right there should have been a red flag, should have been suspended or put on hold, went through a review at the Jeddah office, and then required a face-to-face interview with said applicant. And then the consular office would go to the review board, review the application, and either approve or deny based upon the second interview, that interview face-to-face. Now, Shanya Stienger approved of them. Why? Why? She didn't complain about the Visa Express program, which is fine. She didn't complain about the number of applicants, but she did complain that she wasn't getting any help. She was overworked. But here she is basically saying, I would have passed these applications anyway. Now, she does mention it. Mentioning the incomplete applications, she stated that those applications could have been sent back for completion, but that they would have changed nothing. They would have been returned completed. That's assuming it would have been completed, and the same visa would have been issued. That's not necessarily the case. A statement was made in October of 2001 that henceforth there would be a zero tolerance policy for incomplete application Saudi posts. Well, it's too late by then. The attacks already took place. There should have been a zero tolerance policy for first-time applicants who can't answer where they were going, who they were meeting. Right there should have required a face-to-face interview. Passing applications back and forth until they were completed satisfactorily did not seem to be, in her opinion, Shanya Stienger, an efficient use of scarce human resources. She mentioned that one time a couple planning a tourist visa to the United States misspelled the purpose of their trip on their application form as terrorism. I don't know how you can misspell a purpose of your trip with terrorism. She called her husband in for an interview and the error was corrected. Of course it was. Shanya Stienger said that she reviewed the visa applications of the terrorist hijackers and recalled that there was no direct hits in the class lookout system pertaining to any of them. Right, because all of these muscle hijackers didn't have past histories that required any scrutiny, because most of these people were basically religious students who were illiterate, coming from very poor backgrounds. They didn't have any criminal nature, maybe petty crimes such as stealing, but that's about it. Speaking of the one terrorist that she did interview, Hani Hanjour, Shanya Stienger said that he struck her as a typical middle-class student applicant who was not well connected, even though he went to the University of Arizona in 1992 and has some history inside the United States and had broken English. She said that the cases of Saudis, she intended to fall into one of these socioeconomic classes, and many of the male students were in the middle. No matter which of these three classes they fell into, however, Saudis were exempt from the requirement placed on third country nationals, TCNs, to provide supporting documents such as certified letters from employers, bank statements. Shanya Stienger believed that the fact that Saudis were told to apply without supporting documents confirmed her earlier statement that Saudi Arabia was a virtual visa waiver country. In other words, they were just handing out visas left and right. And this was approved by the U.S. Consular Office, who is basically approved by the State Department. Meanwhile, you have CIA influence in these consular offices. Don't forget that. All a Saudi needs to prove is that he is a Saudi. Hani Hanjo was interviewed because he requested a 3-year stay in the United States on his visa application, while a normal request at that time would have been for a maximum of only 2 years. Now, this is a great point, because what if, say, somebody from Egypt, somebody from Iraq, had a false documentation proving he was a Saudi? All he needed to do was prove he's a Saudi with a falsified Saudi passport or ID card, any type of Saudi documentation, which is falsified, and he's labeled a Saudi, and he's given a visa program to enter the United States. Keep that in mind. Question about resources. Shanya Stienger said she wished she had more staff, one more FSN, but only to avoid overtime and to provide even more careful attention to TCN cases, especially maids. She did not consider that the hijackers received visas because the section was too busy. The junior officer who sometimes helped her had a higher refusal rate than she did. Well, there's a worthy guy. She expressed the opinion that he was denying applicants for the wrong reasons, and in clear, by the way, that's pretty vague. What's considered a wrong reason? And in clear contravention of some established adjudication guidelines. Excuse me, I have a very East Coast accent, so some words are going to come out wrong, so forgive me. For example, he denied student visas to applicants seeking to attend schools of poor repute, telling them to apply again next year with an I-20 from a real school. Shanya Stienger said that there was a clear statement from CA that this kind of refusal was inappropriate, but the other officer persisted. He was counseled to adjust his adjudication practices to comply with the policies set out in the Foreign Affairs Manual. Asked what resources she considered were in too short supply, she said that she wished she had more overlap and time with her predecessor. There are many layers of Saudi society, and it would have helped to have an experienced mentor to show her the way at first. It took her a while to pick up the nuances of this society, and she studied Arabic at the Foreign Services Institute for 9 months and required a 2.1 grade for spoken and reading comprehension. When asked directly if she ever encountered to lower her refusal rate, she said she did not. The other junior officer was spoken to, she said, but he merited the talking to. There were no validation studies done of Saudi NIV holders, and there were no known cases of Saudis overstaying their visas to the US. Well, that's not true. Maybe to others, but Khalid al-Mihdhar definitely did, and so did Nawaf al-Hazmi. And the other muscle hijackers didn't need to, because when they were approved in 2001, they were killed in September 11, 2001 anyway. The virtual Saudi visa waiver, she concluded, was apparently appropriate given the lack of Saudi illegals in the US. Shanya Stienger then discussed events after September 11th, and she expressed surprise that her name has not been publicized, and that only now she was being asked to explain what she did. Well, obviously, in the months after the events, it bothered her that there was so much confusion and inconsistency in mission and department statements about whether or not anything had changed regarding visa adjunctation policies. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, the Post was told not to change its procedures. What? There you have it, folks. Here's the problem laid out right here in front of you. They're just giving out visas to anybody, just like they give out driver's licenses to anybody. They don't care. Hey, by the way, you're a Saudi. You don't have to go through a review. You don't have to come for a face-to-face interview. All you have to do is show some type of identification proving you're a Saudi and you're approved through the visa waiver program. But when the U.S. press picked up a story that nothing had changed, which was based on a telegram she had drafted, the Post was chided by CA for making the department look bad. Now, Shanya Stienger said that after September 11th, she felt worse about the visas she was still issuing than she did about the ones she had previously issued to the hijackers. Well, I understand because, you know, what if she didn't have foreknowledge, right? You know, I happen to think that she was just doing her job because the superiors told her, hey, just put the visa applications through, but she could have used her common sense here. I mean, she basically said, I would have just approved them anyway, even though they were passed, even though the applications were incomplete. The hijackers clearly appeared to be eligible, given the policies and procedures in place before September 11th, but after September 11th, she said she found herself continuing to issue superficially similar cases. The department stated publicly that procedures have been tightened, but they really had not. And I was still pushing the issue button every day. Issue, issue, issue. Have I, she worried out loud, already issued visas since September 11th to the next bunch of terrorists? In late October 2001, Embassy Riyadh informed CA that there was now a zero tolerance for incomplete applications. That should have been the case in 2001 prior to September 11th. Should have been the case. Why? What I just said to you before, that all throughout the spring and summer of 2001, there was warnings from foreign and domestic intelligence agencies suggesting that bin Laden was going to attack inside the United States, that there was going to be a big attack inside the United States. They just didn't know how, when, or where, allegedly. All right. So this is right there, right there. INS, airline security, and of course, every single consular official in the Middle East should have had stricter policy and security measures in place based on those warnings. Do I need to spell it out for you? Okay. I'm sorry. So, all right, that's it, right? Now, you know, later on, State Department officials continued to defend the system. And they were quick to point out that it was not possible for a consular officer to issue a visa unless the name had been checked in the lookout database. With the counterterrorism officers like the FBI, they have a database called the tip-off database, where they run through a name that either came from a suspicious country like Afghanistan or Pakistan, known terrorist hotspots. And if they came back clean, then there was no additional scrutiny or security measures for that individual. Now, according to Mary Ryan, the Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs, she said that they had a struggle with law enforcement and intelligence communities in getting additional information. Now, this is a huge problem because, you know, there's been people in the tube room that think all these agencies are working with one another and they're covering up everything all at the same time. No, the opposite is true, that a lot of these agencies are not working together and sharing data with one another. I mean, 9/11 is the biggest monumental failure of agencies not sharing important information with one another, including domestic agencies, state and local levels, such as the state consular affairs here in the United States or abroad. The CIA didn't share information with the FBI regarding 2 al-Qaeda operatives living inside the United States openly without the FBI or the State Department even knowing. And this is a problem. And it's a problem that J. Michael Springmann tried to point out. This is a problem that people in the FBI, whistleblowers, some of them I've interviewed, Mark Rossini, Ken Williams, who tried to warn their superiors, Robert Wright Jr., all these people in the FBI who basically tried to warn their superiors about an influx of Arab flight people from Saudi Arabia who were training at flight schools in Arizona, in Oklahoma, in Minnesota, in New York, in Texas. And they were all coming through the visa program, the express program, without any additional scrutiny. So I hope this interview, well, I hope this video basically cleared up some questions that you had regarding how the hijackers were approved of their visas, mostly the muscle hijackers anyway. And now we know how they got their applications approved and why they weren't given any additional scrutiny and who we can blame in the future for this. See you guys in the next video.